Hello, everybody. Welcome to our macro social work training, Building Your Case, Your Knowledge, Ability, Skills, and Experience. Very excited to have with us today Ms. Annie Grier. She is a macro social worker and a professor of social work at the University of Florida. She's been very kind to give us this presentation today. Like I said, in some of the event stuff, normally you got to pay for a presentation. It's good. So we're very excited to have Ms. Grier with us. I'm going to hand it off to her in just a second. Just want to remind folks some housekeeping. Feel free to have your video on. We love to see your beautiful face. Please make sure you are muted for the program. We should have some time to chat and question and answer, but just for the majority of the presentation, please observe being on mute. And this recording, don't feel like you have to capture all the information. It will be available via our YouTube page in the coming days and week. So great to see everybody. And we'll go ahead and hand it off to Ms. Grier.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you all. Wait, hold on one second. Okay. There we go. All right. Can everybody see my screen okay? Are you seeing my presentation? Okay. Awesome. So our presentation today is Building Your Case, macro social work career training. And I am Annie Grier. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the owner of IDEEAS, LLC. IDEEAS stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Anti-Racism, Accessibility, and Sustainability. And I'm also an adjunct faculty member at both Fordham University and Columbia University, where I teach in their Masters of Social Work programs. So first, and let me make sure that this is available. I want to make sure that we are able to annotate. So let me hide the names of annotators. Hold on. There we go. So if you have not used the annotate function before, at the top of your screen, you should see a green bar that says that you are viewing Annie Grier's screen. And then you should see view options. If you click on view options, you can scroll down to annotate, and then you'll see a toolbar like this appear. If you click text, you'll be able to point inside the gold box, put your mouse inside the gold box and type. And if you want it to show up, then click outside of the box. If you hit enter, then it's just going to go to another line. So if we can practice, just type like hi or hello, or I'm here, or I figured it out, or I'm a pro at annotate. Just because as we go through today, we're going to co-create the space together. And so I want to make sure that everybody is able to contribute. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like people are getting the hang of it. Hello, macro social workers. Love that. Okay, so I'm going to clear this out. Awesome. Now that we've gotten the hang of it. So today I'll be presenting on not only about pursuing a career in macro social work, but specifically from a guidebook that I created called And Other Related Fields. And so I'm going to, some of the pages that I share will be specifically from that book. The book is downloadable from my website for free. It will always be free. So I don't like to introduce equity barriers. So it will always be free. So if some of the pages are really sticking with you, and in addition to viewing the recording, you're like, I want to work through some more of these pages, then this is where it's coming from. And so I want to start with, what is social work? So social work is both a profession and an academic discipline, which is important as we continue our discussion. And so one, it's important that we understand that we are a profession, which means that we have control over our own educational process. So we get to decide what social work is, and we get to decide who are social workers. So that's what it means for us to be our own profession. We're also an academic discipline. So we have theoretical underpinnings, and you can engage in the academic study of social work as you all are doing, right? So social work as both a profession and an academic discipline centers on engaging people, institutions, and social structures in order to facilitate change, foster social cohesion, and alter power relationships that cause inequality and marginalization. So what is social work? What does that definition mean, both as a profession and as an academic discipline? It means that social work is defined by our 3 Cs. So we have our core values, which are defined by the NASW, or the National Association of Social Workers, which is the largest governing body for social workers. They also give us our code of ethics, which is how we are to conduct ourselves and our ethical boundaries as a profession. So again, as a profession, so not as a job, right, but as professionals who are social workers. And then our competencies, which are given to us by the Council on Social Work Education, because again, we get to determine our own boundaries for what is social work and who becomes a social worker. And so social workers are bound by our core values, our code of ethics, and can demonstrate competency across the 9 competencies that every social worker has to do, no matter where you get your social work degree from. So why am I harping on this? Because this is very important when we begin our conversation about macro social work and careers in macro social work. Because the first thing that people will ask me is, what is a macro social work job? Or something that I hear often is, well, I'm looking to do non-traditional social work, or I'm looking to leave the field. And then I'm like, so what are you interested in? And what they describe to me is macro practice, right? So I'm harping on this because this is going to set the frame for how we think about searching for jobs, our career, our profession, and where we fit in professional spaces. So now that we're grounded in what is social work, so then what is macro social work? Macro describes a scope of practice. It does not describe a type of social work. So it's an imperfect description to say, I want to do macro social work, or I'm a macro social worker, but it's kind of the fastest way to say I'm a social worker who does practice at the macro level, right? So we just shorten that. But if you look at the entire spectrum of practice, you'll see that there's individuals, families, and groups, that's micro practice. And then organizations and institutions, communities, systems, and policy, that's macro practice. It's important to note that the comparison for macro practice is not clinical, right? Clinical is a type of social work. It's a type of micro practice. Macro social work is not a type of social work. It's important to know that micro practice and macro practice can be either direct or indirect. So sometimes people will say, I'm tired of doing direct practice. I want to do macro practice. And I'm like, if you're tired of direct practice, then what you want to do is indirect practice. Whenever we talk about direct, whether we're talking about working directly with people who are experiencing a social problem, or whether we're just talking about in general, working directly with people, in macro practice, I do both. I spend more of my day with other people. I've learned to keep a box of tissues in my office as a macro social worker, just as I did when I did micro practice, right? You're still doing people work. And so it's important to know that the comparison is not direct practice or macro practice, right? So it's micro or macro, and they just describe the scope of the impact of the work that you're doing. So micro social workers hope to impact individuals, families, and groups. Macro workers hope to impact organizations, institutions, community systems, and policy, right? So then when we put all that together, social workers have a degree in social work and are united by the 3 Cs of social work. Micro social workers apply the 3 C's to intervene with individuals, families, and groups affected by social problems or issues. And macro social workers apply those same 3 C's to work with organizations, communities, systems, and policies, either affected by, contributing to, or that address the social problem or social issue. And so social work in and of itself, one of our core values or approaches is using the person and environment perspective. So micro social workers address the person and environment, and macro social workers address the environment in person and environment. But we're all addressing the same thing, right? Using the same 3 C's. So for micro practice, these might be some of the colleagues that you may find that are applying for similar jobs. Again, these are different professions, but they may apply for similar jobs. And then for macro social work, these tend to be the colleagues that you find in macro spaces. So they're different professionals, but we might do similar jobs, right? But you will do the job as a social worker. A social work is the lens through which you see work, approach work, and conduct yourself as a professional. Macro is the scale or the size of the impact that you hope to create, right? So the title of this was talking about building the case for macro competence. And so CASE is an acronym that's not specifically from social work. It's has its place in a number of different professions and fields, but absolutely adaptable to social work. So it stands for knowledge, abilities, skills, and experiences. So that overall, that would describe your competency for doing a particular job, right? So whenever you're applying for a job or wherever you're looking for a job and you're thinking about, can I do this job? Am I competent to do this job? What you're asking yourself is, can I make the case, the knowledge, ability, skills, and experiences that I can do this job, right? And so that's what you're trying to do in your resume. That's what you're trying to do in your cover letter. That's what you're trying to do in your interview, is you're trying to state your case for the position. So you want to tell them what knowledge areas you have, what abilities you have, what skills you have, and what experiences you have. So in the book that the link has been put in the chat, it goes through what are some examples of knowledge areas and ability areas. We're not going to go through this in depth. So you'll have the recording. You also have access to the book. After the presentation, I will also send Andre these slides. So you'll have this exact PowerPoint presentation. So you have plenty of places to read anything that we don't cover in depth. But it also covers some of the skill areas as well. And then with experiences, it's thinking about all of the ways in which you can obtain the other 3, right? And this is important in 2 ways whenever you're looking to expand your macro career. One is when you are applying to jobs. So how many of you have looked at job descriptions and seen, like, we want someone who has 5+ years of experience doing something, right? And maybe you've seen those memes on social media that's like, my favorite one is this guy that's like holding a baby on like a front pouch while he's like teleworking. And he's like just trying to make sure he gets his 20 years of experience before he applies for an entry-level job, right? So that's my favorite one of those. But this idea of like, this is my first job, so how am I supposed to have experience? There are a number of ways in which we obtain knowledge, abilities, and skills. So when you are putting together your resume and when you're looking at job descriptions and they're asking, do you have experience doing this? Unless they specifically ask you, have you ever been paid by an employer to do this? Then what they are asking you, is there anything that you've done that demonstrates that you have these knowledge, abilities, skills, and experiences? Maybe you have gotten it through paid employment. Maybe it was through a certification. Maybe it was through your field placement. Maybe you did an independent study. Maybe you did a fellowship, right? So maybe it was through volunteering. Maybe it was your thesis project or your capstone project if you complete one of those for your degree, right? So there are lots of ways that you can gather your knowledge, abilities, and skills other than just paid employment. And that's what you need to draw attention to whenever you are trying to make the case for a macro position in terms of, do you have the experience doing this, right? The second reason why it's important to understand the experiences column is if you are still in school or young in your career, and even though you may be satisfied in your job now or your career path now, and you may look to transition later, this shows some of the other ways that you can start to develop more macro focused knowledge, abilities, and skills in order to then start to build your case, right? So thinking about what courses you can take, thinking about informational interviews that you can do, um, considering organizations to volunteer with and other ways to start to get experience, right? And so in addition to using so for the knowledge, abilities, and skills parts in particular, the other reason why they're helpful is because these can be some of your search terms for your job search, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it can apply. So I want you to think about these as potential search terms for your job search, as well as thinking about your social work competencies as part of your case, right? So every social work student has been affirmed by an accredited school that they can competently do these 9 things. So sometimes when I talk to students who are about to graduate or they're new to the field and they're feeling like, oh, well, I don't know that I've done anything. You've done at least these 9 things, right? And you've done them to a degree well enough that someone was willing to give you a whole degree for it, right? These can also help to inform some of your search terms, right? So think about your social work competencies. This is an example of different professional fields and domains. So again, when we talk about social work is the application of the 3 C's. Macro social work looks at applying those 3 C's in environments to scale, right? So organizations, communities, systems, and policy. In terms of what that looks like as a job, that can be almost anything, right? So so my full-time position is housed in a university in the human resources department. So sometimes I'll hear social workers say, I'm looking at leaving social work and getting into human resources. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Why do you have to leave? Why do you have to stop applying the code of ethics in which we're trained in, our core values around dignity and worth of the person, social justice, like all of those things, and the competencies that you learned about advocacy, professional use of self, assessing, intervening, evaluating? Why wouldn't you apply that in a job in a human resources department, right? Or why couldn't you apply that in communications or in politics or policy, right? So it's not leaving the field of social work to take a job in one of these spaces because you are the social worker, right? You will bring the social work lens, the social work theories, and social work approaches and interventions to these spaces, right? These spaces can also serve as search terms in your job search, which we'll get to a job search very quickly. And these are also listed in the case workbook as well. So how do we start building towards a macro career? So the first thing is assessment. So thinking about of your case, of your knowledge, abilities, and skills, and your experiences, in which of those are you knowledgeable? So you're like, I know what this is. I've been exposed to it, right? Which are you skilled at, which means you've had actual experience doing it. And which of these have you mastered, which means you would be able to do this with little or no supervision or direction. Inside both the full case guidebook, and also there's a workbook version that just has the assessment and the game plan in it, you are able to do the assessment. I recommend that you do the assessment yourself. I then recommend that you have a peer do the assessment. And then I recommend that you have like a supervisor or a mentor or a teacher. Maybe it's your field instructor, just someone who's been in the profession a while also complete the assessment in terms of rating your knowledge areas, right? And then you have the abilities and the skills. And then also articulating, how did you get that? So what experiences did you use in order to get that? This will not only help in terms of a self-assessment. This is not a self-assessment in terms of, oh, well, you got ones in these, you failed. It can serve in two purposes. One, if you have more education to go and you find areas where you're a one, but you want to get to a two or three, what experiences can you undertake so that you can then sharpen those, right? Two, you can also look at it as, so where are my twos and my threes? Maybe that's giving me, maybe that's my internal compass telling me what types of work I would want to do. So if you got a one in administration, but you don't like administration, that's fine. This is not a test that's telling you, well, you failed at administration. This is just saying maybe administration is not going to be of interest to you. Or if you're like, you know what, I think I want to do a little bit more of that, then you might want to talk with your peer or your supervisor about what experiences you can do to raise that one to a three, right? And then, oh, I think I see something in the chat. Oh, there we go. So the workbook has been put in the chat. So then after you go through that, and it'll take you through the knowledge, abilities, and skills, then it'll ask you to create your game plan. And so it'll ask you, so of the things that you had that are ones, which of those do you want to acquire, right? Of the things that were maybe twos, which of those do you want to develop a little bit more, right? And then what do you want to sharpen? And then it will take you through creating a game plan about how you'll go about doing that. So again, just looking at the first page in terms of the knowledge areas, the full assessment and game plan are in the two documents that were shared. But this is just an example. So if you're like, hey, I want to get better at community development right now, I would say that this is something I want to acquire, right? I just want a little bit more information. Or if you're like, no, this is something that I really want to develop, right? I want to get to kind of a mastery level about this. Then identify what courses you could take coming up, identify what potential field placements you could do, and then going back to our experiences list and see if there are other experiences that you could do in order to gain this. Let's say if your school doesn't offer a course in it, right? So part of that may be the advocacy piece. You may be able to advocate for joint listed courses, to ask for a course to be joint listed. You could advocate that your school adopt reciprocity, either both internally at the university or with neighboring universities. So joint listed means that a course automatically counts for credit in all the departments for which it's listed. So let's say there's like so I used to teach a cross-listed course, and it was on policy interventions for the criminal justice system. And it was cross-listed in the social work department and the public health department. So it counted as a 3-hour credit course in either one of those departments. So students who were pursuing either degree could take it. Also at my alma mater, I took classes where we had reciprocity. So I went to Washington University in St. Louis. Another university that was nearby, University of Missouri, had a really highly ranked criminology school, and my focus was on the criminal justice system. So I took 3 courses in their criminology school. So they weren't cross-listed at WashU or in my social work department. They were at an entirely different university, but those 2 universities had reciprocity. So I could take up to 9 credit hours of my social work degree at another school. So you could start to advocate for stuff like that if what you're focused on, or even being focused in a macro areas. A lot of programs are very heavily focused on micro work or clinical work specifically. So maybe advocating for some of those course changes so that you can still do coursework within your own school. Also may need to advocate around field placement and internships, right? So maybe your school just assigns you somewhere, or they just give you a list, but a lot of their existing relationships may be with micro-focused or clinically focused places. So maybe creating your own internship, finding someone who can do the supervision, and then writing up a proposal, or advocating to your field placement office to just in general find more places for macro placement. Getting them to work with your school's alumni association to see if alumni would be willing to volunteer hours as field supervisors. So according to CSWE, for your specialized field placement, it has to be someone who has at least 2 years post MSW. But let's say you're working at an organization and they don't have any MSWs on staff. You can find another MSW who is not employed there to still provide your field supervision. And then someone at that organization would just be your task supervisor. And so sometimes that presents a barrier, but one strategy that I've used and that I've seen other schools use is to tap into their alumni and say, hey, we have a number of students who are interested in doing field placements, and the only thing that's holding them up is these organizations or congressmen's offices or policy think tanks, or wherever these macro places are, newspapers, right, TV stations, is that they don't have an MSW on staff. So would you be willing to volunteer to do the 1 hour a week supervision, to do the assessments that are done, and then to do the meetings that are typically at the midterm and at the end? So would you be willing to volunteer in this capacity to serve as a field supervisor? So that could be a strategy that, like, not just for a single one of you, but maybe your school could adopt in order to open up the types of placements that are available. And so after you create your game plan for all the knowledge, abilities, and skills, and think through what are some experiences you could use to acquire, sharpen, and refine them, then it'll ask you for each one, who can you get advice from for this game plan? What other opportunities can you seek out? When is the best time to do this? So maybe, thinking about how you're going to use your summer, or if you're completing a bachelor's program, do you want to take time between your BSW and your MSW, or take time between an MSW and a PhD, right? So thinking about what timing looks like, and then also where you can find more information. And it'll ask you to do that for the knowledge areas, as well as the abilities and skills. So that'll help you to put together a game plan about how you want to go about building your case before you get on the job search, right? Which is what we're going to talk about next. How many of you have just been waiting these last 30 minutes for me to talk about finding a job? You're like, yeah, that's cute. Explaining social work, talking about a game plan and assessment. I just need to hear about these jobs, right? Okay. So the first step to finding a career. So there are 2 things that I want to separate out. So one is a job search, and the second is job application. So a job search is when you are finding what work would look like for you. So that would include finding, looking at that list of professional fields and domains that I provided, and seeing if there are some that stick out to you. Do you want to pursue jobs in higher education? Are you thinking more about nonprofits? And there's a ton of nonprofits, right? So 501c3 is only one of 24 types of nonprofits, and one of about 8 that I think, excuse me, that I think are great fits for social workers. Let me just go back to that real quick, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows that. So a lot of times, even in schools of social work, we tend to use nonprofit as a synonym for a 501c3, which is a charitable organization, which means that the existence of this organization has to be to serve a public good, and any money that they have left over at the end of a fiscal year has to be put back into an organization, right? For profit means that at the end of the year, they can give their money to their shareholders, right? A nonprofit doesn't mean that it's broke, or that you have to be broke if you work there. right? So first, let's divorce ourselves of like social workers taking vows of poverty and nonprofits taking vows of poverty, right? Secondly, C3 is only one of a few that are natural fits for social workers. Again, there's I think literally 24 different classifications of 501Cs. But C3s, which are your traditional ones, are great. C4s are going to be your organizing organizations. So like, excuse me, suddenly got a tickle in my throat. So like the ACLU or like the League of Women Voters. So they're the ones who are doing explicit advocacy and organizing. For 501c3s, depending on where they're getting their money from, they typically can spend no more than 25% of their budget on any real type of advocacy. And in order to avoid that, most of them focus on education, right? So they might say like, here's why we need smaller class sizes in schools, right? And just in general, provide information about smaller class sizes in schools. A 501c4 will say, vote yes on Prop 1 that puts limits on school sizes, or a vote for Amber Barker as a vote for an educator who supports smaller class sizes, right? Like they can endorse candidates, specific policies, pieces of legislation, those sorts of things. C5s are labor organizations. So like the SEIU or the National Educators Association, great places for social workers who are interested in macro spaces. I worked for SEIU for 6 months. I got fired. I was terrible. I still love them as an organization. I still tell people to go work for them. They were great. I'm just a terrible community organizer. Um, it's great work. C6s are trade organizations like chambers of commerce. I did an internship at the Latino Business Chamber when I lived in Los Angeles. It's a great place to do work. I also did some work with the St. Louis Business Chamber when I lived there. Lots of things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. But when you break it down, it's people work, and social work is ultimately a degree in people. So anywhere that there are people is a place that needs a social worker, right? Also, professional football leagues like the NFL are technically nonprofit organizations. I'm poo-pooing that because, again, if anything is a model for nonprofit, doesn't mean you have to be poor. Is the NFL, right? Um, however, there are lots of opportunities if you're interested in sports. There's even certifications. I know University of Michigan has a specialization and are developing a postgraduate certification specifically in sports social work. Now, I don't know enough about Michigan geopolitics to know if I say University of Michigan, is the Wayne State audience like going to boo me and everybody's about to log off? Or are you guys like sister friends? So I just don't know enough about Michigan geopolitics. But so they are developing a sports certification for social workers. But there are everything from doing micro practice to actual counseling with athletes to doing macro social work with sports teams, like doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Or many of them have community outreach arms. So NFL has Play 60. The NBA has another nonprofit arm. A lot of them are also creating social justice arms. In light of, big events over the last 2 years, right? I have a friend who works for like the Portland Trailblazers. And so in addition to their like overall community efforts, they also have a racial justice initiative that looks at how they can specifically heal racial wounds in the city of Portland, right? That needs a social worker, right? And I know in macro spaces that like lawyers will apply to that job and people with business degrees. I'm like, y'all need a social worker to do this. But the thing is that a lot of social workers won't go to it's like Teamwork Online or something is a job that where you can find jobs with professional sports organizations, right? Or they won't go directly to a sports team and their jobs and look and say like, hey, is there something I can do here, right? So it's also about social workers knowing that those are places where we need to look. And then C7s, which are like college, they're social clubs. So like college fraternities and sororities, like the JCs, Lions Club, those sorts of things. Again, great places for social workers because they're obviously looking to do a lot of community work and those sorts of things. Service tends to be a huge tenet of a lot of those organizations. So they need a social worker. Corporate social work. So even if you're outside of the nonprofit, going into the for-profit side. So there's a whole organization called Corporate Social Workers that's just now getting off the ground. Highly encourage you to tap into them. But looking at both corporate social responsibility or CSR, as well as looking at philanthropy within for-profit corporations, both of which are looking to leverage the money that they have left over at the end of the year, since they can do whatever they want to it, unlike a nonprofit, which has to put it back into the operations of the organization. And they're looking to do some public good. Well, who better to tell them how to spend that money than someone who was trained and knowing what societal problems exist and what are the evidence-based interventions that address it? A social worker. In case you didn't know the answer, figured out just not leave it be a cliffhanger and just say it there at the end. Okay, so we backtracked a little bit to make sure that we covered that. So as we're looking for jobs, so that's what I mean by finding what type of career domains. Are you going to look at nonprofits? Are you going to look at all the nonprofits? Are you going to look at C4s? Or are you going to look at sports places? Are you going to look in corporate social responsibility, something like that? A job search also includes refining your search terms. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Building your network, doing informational interviews, and completing any trainings or certifications that you might find useful when you go on the job market. So I would say leave yourself about 3 to 6 months for your job search. Job application is when you're reaching out to contacts, so these people who you've met who said, yeah, when you're looking for a job or when you graduate, call me. Now you're going to call them and you're saying, yes, I need to be employed now, or completing actual applications. Leave yourself about 1 to 3 months for that. The way that things are now with the current job market, so there are a lot of places hiring, but there are also a lot of people who are looking. And so it's just super competitive right now. And so I've even been telling people to back this up a little bit more. So if anybody is, well, one, if you're graduating next month, get on it, right? But if you're graduating at the end of even summer, I would say get through this part so that you can get right through this, right? If you're a December graduate, like you've got some time, but I would say at the start of that semester, maybe start applying to some things. Out of most jobs that I've seen, particularly if it's an entry level position, they'll give you at least 30 days to have your degree conferred. Some will give you 60 days. So you just put the pending date of your graduation on your resume. Okay. So in terms of job sites, LinkedIn is my favorite, and I'm going to show you why in a moment. But these are a few other ones that I think have a lot of jobs that bend towards social workers. So we're going to use our annotate function. What are some other job search sites that you like to use? And you can list the ones that I don't use because they're not my favorite, but I know there are other ones that are more popular. But you can share on the screen. What are some other job searches that you use? Oh, you may want to click the text tool instead of the draw tool. It'll be easier to write. Indeed. Yep. Knew that was coming. It's popular, but not a fan. That's okay though. Monster, absolutely. The Michigan Nonprofit Association, word of mouth, absolutely. Definitely. Again, social work is a degree in people. So leverage people to find work opportunities. The MNA.org, see that in the chat? Awesome. Okay. Anything else during your field placement, right? So converting your field placement into a job. And the easiest way to do that is to find your own money. If you're working in a nonprofit organization, offer to write a grant that will fund the first couple of years of your position. I have never heard of an organization turning that down. I'll just say that. Okay, is that it? So I will save this. And then you'll have this as well. Oh, the WSU job board. Awesome. Handshake. Yep. Awesome. Okay. So I will save this and then I will clear it out, but then you'll have access to the other suggestions when you get a copy of this PowerPoint. Okay, so let's clear that out. So one of the things that, again, Indeed is really popular and I get it. However, I'm going to give you some suggestions about LinkedIn that I think will make your search on LinkedIn more fruitful in terms of what it actually returns when you ask it for jobs. And then also just going directly to the website, going directly to the websites of where you want to work. So if you know you want to work with veterans, you can put veterans Indeed. It gets you a mixed bag of results. You can put veterans in LinkedIn, depending on how you've designed your profile. You may or may not get a ton of results back. But if you just go to Google and you're like, what are veterans organizations? And then you go to, say, the Wounded Warrior Project, you'll see every job that they have open, right? And a lot of them would be great for social workers, right? What a lot of job seekers don't know is that the reason why these things are free for you to use is because it costs the employer. So when I advertise on Indeed, it was about $15 a day per position. So that can get expensive really quickly, right? And so that's also why you may see sometimes on like Indeed and those sites in particular, you'll see a job advertised for a couple of days. You'll go to look for it a week later, it won't be there. And then a week later, you'll see it up again. And then some people are like, is that a red flag about that organization? Are they playing games? Did someone take the job and then found out it was a toxic work environment and then quit? Right. And it's like, no, they probably just don't have the money to advertise it every day. And most people, when they go on Indeed, they have their filter search for show me the last 7 days or show me the last 2 weeks. And so if their post was done after that, it'll go to the bottom of that person's list, right? Or it won't show up at all if they say, show me what's been posted in the last 7 days. So a number of organizations, if they don't have the money, will do an on again, off again approach to advertising on sites for which they have to pay, like Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter, all of that stuff, right? And so they'll advertise a position for, they'll do some analytics about when do most people do job searches, which is typically Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they'll have it posted. You won't see it if you go look for it on Tuesday. Try again on Friday. They'll probably repost it, right? Whereas their website, it's free for them to post everything, right? Because the other thing that I had to do with Indeed was only advertise like our higher profile jobs. Whereas on our website, I could post every single job that we had because that was free, right? I didn't have to pick and choose. So going directly to the websites of jobs where you want to be employed is the 100% way to find out all the jobs that they have available. So the first step, so we've got our search engines. The first thing that you want to do is don't put social work into a job search engine. If you're looking for a macro position and you put social work or you put macro social work, you will get nothing. You'll crawl into a ball, you will lay on the floor and you will cry in the fetal position. And you will feel like you'll never get a job because there is no work for macro social workers, okay? Again, this is why we talk about this at the beginning. Macro social work is an imperfect way to describe the work that we do based on our degree in spaces that impact organizations, communities, institutions, and policies and systems, right? It's not something that anybody outside of a social work school knows about. I do not talk to people outside of social work and they're like, oh, well, I'm a macro lawyer because I do environmental law, right? Or civil rights law, right? So I don't do micro law where I defend individual defendants in criminal court, right? Or they don't say I do macro law because I do corporate law, which means I defend an entire hospital or an entire healthcare system, right? Even though other fields have micro and macro practice, they don't typically talk about their work in that language. That's a very social worker thing that we do, mostly based off of Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, which we use as a theoretical model, which talks about the microsystem, the mesosystem, the macrosystem, and the exosystem, right? So it's based on a theory that we use as a field to discuss the relationships between people, and then we just started using it to describe our types of jobs. And we didn't tell anybody else about it, right? So they don't know what this means. So don't put macro social worker into a job search engine. Nobody knows what that means, right? Instead, think about your job search as your last great lit review, right? So that's why our first step is to come up with all of our search terms, right? So as you've been doing throughout your program, whatever you're studying, right? If you're studying, mental health in children, you're going to come up with all your mental health terms. You're going to come up with all your words for children, kids, K through 12, elementary school, right? You're going to do all of that. You want to do that with your job search as well. Start by thinking about what type of job search you want to do, right? So in social work, so when people are children, we tend to ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then they go to social work school and we ask, what population do you want to work with? Right? As though that's the only way to think about work. Right. And so whenever I talk to social work students or new social workers, and they're trying to answer the question of what population do you want to work with? And they don't have an answer, then I'm like, oh, well, then you probably want to be a macro social worker. Because work can be based on things other than a targeted, affected population experiencing a social problem. So maybe what drives you in work is skill-based. So I have a friend, macro social worker. She's an incredible writer. She'll write everything from peer-reviewed journal articles. We wrote one together and just found out yesterday that we submitted it. So it's under review. So fingers crossed. But she'll write everything from peer-reviewed journal articles to editorials for newspapers to community reports, all of that. She just loves storytelling, right? And combining numbers with people, putting the people to the numbers and taking the stories of people and being able to aggregate it to show how large the problem is. She will do that for recently incarcerated individuals. She'll do it for children exiting the foster care system. She'll do it for people experiencing intimate partner violence. She doesn't have a specific population. She just wants to do it on behalf of marginalized individuals. But what drives her is getting to write and tell stories, right? And so maybe, you just want to be a project manager, but you would take on any number types of projects, or you like doing research and you would be interested in any number of populations, right? Maybe what drives your interest in work is space or play space. So again, maybe you want to work in nonprofits. Maybe you want to work in corporations. Maybe you want to work for a sports team or in higher education, or in hospital settings, right? Maybe it's literally a space like a particular city, and you're just like, I just know I want to stay here, and so I'm just going to look for any type of macro work that I can do and still stay in this particular place, right? Or you may have a people or an issue-based drive to work. Maybe it's what the issue is. Maybe it's like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or maybe it's a subset of marginalized individuals like LGBTQIA plus individuals, or working within the criminal justice system or children, youth, and teens, right? So either you already know which of these drive your work, and you can then gather your search terms. Or you're like, I don't even know the answer to this question, in which case, try all three. And then we'll talk about the process of editing down. So we're going to use our annotate button again, and we're going to practice generating search terms. So if you say, I'm just interested in working in the community, but you don't really know what that means, you just know you want to do community work. What are some terms that you would use to find jobs where you are working in the community? So you can use your annotate function. If you drop them in the chat, I'll try to add them to the annotate, because again, I'm going to screenshot this slide and give it back to you, so you will have these terms. So it's helpful if you participate, because that means you're getting these answers back. So what are some words you would use for community? You might want to select the text tool. Yep. Organizing. Well, I'm seeing them pop up. Here we go. Engagement coordinator. Person-centered. Yep. What else for community? Okay. If you're still typing in there, you can do that. What about policy? If you're just like, I want to do policy work, and I have a lot of people say that to me, and I'm like, what do you want to do in policy? And they're like, I don't know. So what are some things that you might put if you were interested in policy? Legislative assistant, absolutely. That is like, I think if you are a social worker who's interested in policy, a legislative assistant is like an awesome entry-level job. Doing research, policy analysis, absolutely. Another good entry-level job for social workers interested in policy. Legislative casework. Yep. When I lived in Los Angeles, there was a state representative who had social workers in his office. And so, you know how they have like hotlines where it's like, if you have a pothole and you call your congressman and you tell them, fix my pothole, right? Like he had social workers who responded to that line and they just solved people's problems, basically is what they did. I never knew all the things that people called their congressperson for. I found out quite a bit, everything from I didn't get my check. Can you, how do I get it? And they would literally help people track down checks they didn't get from previous employers or whatever it was, right? Awesome. What about advocacy? If you're like, I'm just interested in advocacy work, but you don't know what specifically you would want to do, what might be some things you might search? Oh, someone said in the chat that they know social workers who work in a Michigan senator's office. Awesome. Project coordinator, absolutely. Project coordinators are another great entry-level jobs for social workers. But oftentimes I find that social workers talk themselves out of it because they're like, oh, I don't have experience. And I'm like, I feel like all of social work is group work. I'm sure you have coordinated the completion of projects, or they've run all these student groups. They've been like president of their like sorority chapter, and that will be nowhere on their resume. And I'm like, are you kidding me? If you do not put this on here and say you coordinated some stuff, right? Community liaison, absolutely. Awesome. And lastly, if you wanted to work with programs, what might be some other words you would use to describe program? Or what types of jobs might you find in working with programs? Program coordinator, program manager, absolutely. Anything else for any of these before I save this and keep us going? Volunteer engagement, yep, facilitator, program development, funding, absolutely. One of my students recently got a job with a private foundation. I did my second internship At a private foundation, social workers absolutely belong in funding spaces, giving out the money, not just begging for it for their nonprofit. Um, Education, site lead. Awesome. I love all of these. All right. So I'm going to save this. Philanthropy. I saw that pop up. Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to save these. Awesome. And then I'll clear it out. There we go. So now that we've we've chosen our search engine, whichever one we like, and we've gotten all of our search terms, right? So we've looked at the case, right? So all of the knowledge search terms, abilities, skill search terms. We looked at the social work competencies for search terms. We looked at the professional domains for search terms. We just generated some search terms on our own. So we've got a lot of terms that we're going to put in the search engine, right? And so we're going to start entering them into our search engines. And then we're going to, just as in the same way that we would with a lit review, we're not going to do much editing. We're just going to see what we're getting, right? So just look at the first few jobs that come up, first 20, first 30, however much you got. And I want you to go through them. And I want you to highlight in green the parts of that organization or that job that excite you, that would get you interested in getting out of bed and going to work or going downstairs, wherever it is you work, if you work from home, right? Underline the verbs in the job description, right? So that's going to let you know if you need to do a skill-based search. So is it that every time someone says you're going to coordinate stuff, you get excited, right? Is it about other key terms and phrases or those populations that you're interested in? Or is it a space and place, right? So just highlight everything in green and then start to figure out, like, is it what I would actually be doing that excites me? Is it who I would be doing it for, or what the topic is that excites me? Or is it the environment and the space in which I would be doing it that excites me most? You may find that it's more than one of those. That's fine. Or you may find like, nope, this is the part that really drives me, right? And then you want to start keeping a running list of your words that are coming up in green. So just like with your lit review, you're going to add new terms as you find out, like, yep, oh, that's also what people call it, right? Think about your keywords that you look for in articles when you do your lit review search, and you start adding that to your list. Then I want you to go through that first batch and highlight in yellow the things that give you pause. And then I want you to think about why it gives you pause. What I find with most of my social work students and young social workers is that it comes from underestimating your case. So this feeling that, oh, I don't really know if I can do that, or I don't have 10 years of experience, right? So is it that you're underestimating what you could actually bring to the table and what you've actually done? Is it around insecurity or self-doubt, feeling like you're not good enough? Are you intimidated by the job title? So it says director of something. I can apply for a director, right? So I have Masters of Social Work students who are scared to apply for director jobs because they're called director. And I'm like, first of all, a master's degree is an advanced degree. So you qualify for a job called director. Second of all, job titles are reflections of organizational structure, not your ability to do it. That's what that organization calls that position. That's not who should apply or who is qualified to do it. That same job somewhere else may be called a coordinator, and somewhere else may be called a specialist, and somewhere else, may be called a, like, you find these, like, particularly for-profit organizations that try to give like super creative titles that don't, like, you might be called like people genius, right? Because they're just trying to come up with something fun that you would want as a job description. And it's like, okay, people genius is just some HR specialist, but whatever, right? So, a job title is just a reflection of organizational structure, not whether or not you should apply for it. Is it around imposter syndrome? This idea that you're not going to be good enough, that you're not going to belong, that you would be the only social worker in that space. Remember, in macro spaces, your colleagues tend to be people with law degrees and business degrees and other academic disciplines who don't teach their students to be poor and be meek and just, oh, I just want to help people, right? That's how we get indoctrinated as social workers, right? Like, oh, I just want to help people and I don't care if I'm poor. I'm in it for the outcome, not the income, right? So we even come up with like cute slogans that say that, I'm never going to make back what I paid for this degree. Get over that. We're not here for that. Okay. So we're going to move past our imposter syndrome. We're going to apply anyway. This is particularly true in social work because social work is a field that tends to be disproportionately populated by women. And what business research has shown us is that cisgendered men are likely to apply for a job as long as they meet 60% of the job description qualifications. And cisgendered women tend to apply for jobs only if they meet 90% or more. So whenever you look at a job, ask yourself, would a cisgendered man apply for this? And then apply, right? Okay. So we're going to move past our imposter syndrome. Or maybe it's just a lack of translation, right? So they're asking, have you ever done policy analysis or analysis of any sort? And you're like, no, I've only analyzed data that clients have given me in micro settings from doing biopsychosocials and um, analyzing the results of their um, diagnostic tools, right? Like a Beck depression inventory or, the happiness scale or whatever. And it's like, you just told me you did analysis. So the skills of analyzing things. We're just going to swap out, right, criteria from the DSM-5 with pieces of legislation, and it's going to be the same process, right? So it's about learning how to translate what you've done in other spaces to what they're asking to show them that you do have the skill and you do have the ability to do it. You may just be missing the knowledge area, and you can typically read up on that, right? So work through those things first before you convert your yellows to reds. See if there's a way that you can convert it to a green first. A lot of it is having a classmate or a colleague review your resume. That's why I also ask them to do the assessment, right? Because other people think of us more highly than we tend to think of ourselves. We tend to be our worst critic, right? So we're like, sometimes I will do consultations with like friend groups or something like that. And one person will be like, oh, I haven't done anything. And the other person will be like, girl, you did this and you did this and you did this, right? And so having somebody else, right, talk you up is helpful. Again, try translating your case before completely taking that job or that job skill or that job area off the table, right? Work with someone to say, is there a way for me to take these other experiences that I've had and relate them to what this job is asking me to do before you completely take it off the table? You can use free resources to increase familiarity with something. So if they're saying, oh, we want you to do policy analysis, and you're like, I feel like I should know what that is, but honestly, if you ask me for a definition, I don't think I know. Then maybe you could try doing a course on LinkedIn or Coursera. Coursera courses are free to take, but you pay for the certification. So if you want to get the certificate, to add the certificate to your resume, you'd have to pay for that. But if you're just like, I just want to know how to write my resume and know what I'm talking about if I get an interview for this, then you may just take the course and not pay for the certificate. LinkedIn, well, some of their courses are free, some of their courses come at an expense. We're recording this, but we're going to pretend this is off the record. I've seen people share login information for LinkedIn if they buy a subscription to LinkedIn, so it gets split up among a couple of people so people can take courses. Sometimes they offer a 30-day free trial, and then that 30 days, if someone goes in with a really targeted plan about what they want from the paid version, they can knock stuff out within 30 days. But mostly I've just heard a lot of people that even paying for 1 month of the basic LinkedIn, which gives you access to all their courses, has been enough. Whether they've gotten completed formal certificates where they get the Credly badge added to their LinkedIn page and therefore can add it to their resume, they're like, I have a certificate in this, or whether it's just getting information so that they know how to translate their case, right? And then also, if you are still in school, structuring your education to build to a place, to jobs that you're looking for. Um, and then also consider like life coaching, advising, mentoring, right? To just talk through some of these things. And then lastly, keep track of anything that is an absolute no-go for you and listen to that, right? The reason why I separate out your job search from job application is because your job search gives you the mental and emotional space to figure out what you want from work, what that looks like, where to find it, um, without the pressure of, I just have to take the first people who say yes because I need money now, right? And then you're going to end up with a job that has a lot of your no zones. And then you're going to leave that job in 6 months and you're going to go because you're just so over this job, you're just going to take whatever next job tells you yes first. And then you're not going to like that job. And then you're going to start to build a resume that has a lot of turnover, right? And you're not going to be satisfied in whatever work satisfaction looks like for you, if you're taking lots of jobs that have your no zones. So don't ignore them, but find out what they are early and do the job search part far enough in advance that when you start doing job applications that you know that there are still a lot of things to apply for, right? Because you have all these words, all these different domains that you're going to look in, all these strategies, right? You've really refined your search. And you're still going to know that that still leaves you hundreds of jobs to apply for, right? Unlike putting macro social work in a job engine, which I did in Indeed 2 years ago, and 6 came back and they were all in schools of social work. So we're not going to do that, right? Okay. So let me pause here before I go into the translating micro work into macro work and just see what questions do you have? Or what are you thinking so far? Is this helpful so far? Or are you like, I can't believe Andre told us to come here. This lady's boring. She's not talking about anything that I don't already know. Just where are we at right now? Let's check in.
Somebody want to say something in the chat or
Yeah.
come off mute?
Okay. Feeling optimistic. Good. Like to hear optimism. Helpful. Good to know search terms. Awesome. Any
I'm really
questions?
enjoying it. I think it's great. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Good.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of this career finding stuff can be helpful for, just everybody, all social workers. I'm sorry, did somebody else want to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say was not planning on coming today, and I'm so glad I came. Like the way you're presenting and is wonderful. Like I'm interested in everything, and I feel like I'm gonna leave with homework to be able to go and do a job search differently.
Yeah.
Just this, even the search term thing always kind of is hard. Like I can't find exactly what I want. So,
Mhm.
thinking about it in a different way is really helpful. So thanks.
Yeah. Good. Good. Okay. Well, that's good. Because since I'm okay with people not being on screen, but it also means I'm not getting nonverbal cues. So, all right. Good. Glad that we checked in. So let's talk a little bit about translating micro practice to macro practice. Um, yeah, definitely need to get this. I'm just going back to the comments real quick. Need this information outside of social work, so that they know what we can do, right? And look at our applications differently. But that's part of the reason why I do this section on translating micro to macro practice for that very comment. And I'm glad that it was made. Um, Again, when we talk about who our colleagues are likely to be as social workers in macro spaces, who your supervisor is likely to be, who's likely to have written the job description or be on the search committee or reviewing the applications, it's a good chance that it's not going to be a social worker, right? And so, having been on several search committees and doing this for a while, I've had social workers apply to macro jobs and they will send in an awesome micro resume. I'm like, if I needed a school social worker, you would be it. Like, I love this. but that's not what I'm hiring for, right? I know that those skills are transferable, but we can't make other people do the work, right? So you may have heard that the average person who's reviewing resumes spends about 7 to 10 seconds looking at your resume. I would say that that's probably accurate, but once I heard that statistic, I tried to do it a little bit more, but I still only spend about 17 seconds on a resume, right? It's usually pretty clear right away whether or not this person um, would be a good add to what we're looking for in the position, right? Not even a fit, but an add, right? Um, and so you have to um, construct your application materials in a way that makes it concise but evident that you have the right case for this job with a social work degree, and not that you are their stereo conception of a social worker, which is that we take babies and help people in hospitals, right? Who now has decided all of a sudden that they want to be the director of student affairs at a university, right? So you have to do that translation work. So part of it is first remembering that macro is about scale, not skill, right? Other than when you are doing your like concentration courses, or maybe your concentration or specialized field placement, then there starts to be some skill differential between what micro social workers and what macro focused social workers do. But we all tend to start in the same place, right? I tell social workers all the time when they're like, when they say things about non-traditional social work and stuff like that, and I'm like, social work tells you up front what it is, right? But I feel like we just ignore it. So most social work programs have 5 to 6 core classes. There's typically like a human behavior in the social environment class, right? There's typically a policy class. There's typically a research or research methods class. There's typically a practice with organizations and communities class, right? And then there's typically like a practice with individuals, families, and groups class. And then there may be like a diversity class or like an ethics class or something that tends to be the 6th one, right? But 3 of your 5 core classes are macro practice. How people leave social work school not knowing that research is social work and policy is social work and practice with organizations and communities is social work. I'm like, I know for a fact that you did these classes. Social work told you exactly who it was, but you just positioned it as, oh, research is probably just good to know about. So that I know where my thinking for a change or where my TFCBT came from. Like, no, this is not just so you know how the baby was made. This is because social workers actually do the research, right? And so you have the skills and you have the knowledge. What you are making the case, if you've been doing micro practice work and want to switch over to macro, is that you want to apply the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they are asking for to a different scale. So instead of doing this for individuals, you now want to do this for their university. Or instead of facilitating groups of 8 to 12, you are ready to do trainings of 20 to 30, right? So first is selling them on the scale, right? It's not that I've never done this. I've done this. I've just done this on a smaller scale. Now I'm ready to up my scale. That's why I'm applying to this job, right? And thinking about, even if you have a population or a target area that you're interested in, thinking about how you can apply having done micro work in that space to any number of macro jobs. So I worked in the criminal justice system in a variety of capacities for 15 years. The first 6 was doing micro practice with incarcerated women and their children, right? And then I knew I wanted to do macro work, and I specifically did research, but I could have taken that knowledge and applied it in a lot of different ways, right? So making the case that your experience having worked with the affected population does add value to what they're trying to do at the macro level, right? So if you're looking to work as a legislative aide, making the case that you having worked directly in these communities that fall within this district, right, means that, you know, you can share what you've learned by being close to the people with the person who's making those decisions. It means that you have subject matter expertise around what impacts families or what social problems are affecting that district that you can contribute to a team that's looking to craft policy. So you may not know how to write an actual policy brief, but you know what should be in it because you've been working with those individuals, families, and groups for years, right? So this slide is, it's in the case workbook, and another one that helps you think about how you take what you've learned from micro practice and use that as a cell for getting for working in a macro position, right? So we won't go through all of these, it's in the book. Again, thinking about ways that you can start to do macro level things, even while you're in school or immediately following school, so that you start developing some of those more macro specific knowledge, abilities, and skills, right? So whether it's volunteering, serving on a board, I highly encourage students to serve on boards of directors during their education. During my master's program, I Googled organizations that worked with incarcerated mothers and their families. Before I moved to St. Louis, reached out to all three of them, emailed all three of them and said, hey, I'm coming there for graduate school and I'm looking to be on a board of directors. And one of them called me back and I went to my first board meeting before I went to my first class. It's essentially free labor for them. They had somebody who had to do projects where I had to do an organizational assessment for my practice 2 class. Guess what organization I chose? The one I was on the board for. I had to do an assignment where I found evidence-based interventions on women who abuse substances. Guess who got that page paper of all the interventions they should use? The organization I was on the board for. I had to do a program eval. Guess whose programs I evaluated, right? I took a grant writing class. Guess who I wrote a grant for? The organization I was on the board for, right? They never knew how much they wanted students to be on their board. And once I got on there, they were like, can you recruit more social work students to be on our board, right? The thing about being on a board is that you have to have some value. At this point, typically what nonprofit organizations, particularly 501c3s, the value that they're looking for is money and connections, right? But if you're like, I don't have money and connections, but I can do some work, they're like, yes, we will take you too, right? So so I highly encourage you to serve on a board of directors. Oh, I got a comment. Oh yeah, the workbook's back in there. Awesome. Doing internships, fellowships. There's a website called profellows.org, which is just a comprehensive list of fellowships, everything from paid to unpaid to long-term to short-term, to things that you quit your job and go do, to things you can do while you're employed and it's just a couple evenings or weekends a month, right? So I would check that out if that's something that you're interested in and exploring. I think it's called profellows.org. Seeking out mentorships, doing professional certifications, and then doing other certificates. So professional certifications are issued by universities, right? So I have my certification in nonprofit management from a university that shall not be named because it's a rival of my actual alma mater. So I went to UNC Chapel Hill for my bachelor's. I got my certificate in nonprofit management from the other school that has blue. That's 8 miles up the road, okay? Other certificates are issued by like nonprofit organizations or, you know, these other groups like Coursera and Google, stuff like that, right? So, and then serving on committees. So one of the other things I did during my graduate program was served on the allocations committee for the United Way. And it just helped put me in the room with people that I could share, like, oh, I'm a student and I'm eventually going to be looking to do this kind of thing. I don't know how much I actually contributed to their process, but it was helpful for me to have gathered those names and built those relationships and then reach back out to them later when I was looking for field placements and jobs, right? People love people who are on committees who can do work. And if you're still in school, always advocate to change an assignment. During my graduate program, with every class, with the exception of one, we're not going to talk about him. Every other professor allowed me to change an assignment so that at the end, what I created was a product instead of a paper, right? As I said at the beginning, I'm a professor, right? I teach at two the top schools of social work in the entire country. Do you know what I do with my students' 15-page papers at the end of the semester? It just sits on a file on my computer. I don't do anything with them. I don't read them. And now that they're not physically on paper, I don't even recycle them anymore, right? Like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't even care about their grades. They care about their grades, right? So it's like, that's not what I'm here for. I want you to learn things. I'm not even interested in reading this 15-page paper because they all start to sound the same after a while, right? So doing 60, 15-page papers over the course of your social work career is probably not the best way to spend your time. But go to your professor and say, hey, I'm picking up what you're putting down, right? I see what the goal of this is supposed to be and what I'm supposed to demonstrate. But instead of writing like an expository 15-page paper, do you mind if I write this in a way that I can give this as a report to an organization for which I'm on the board? So I can still meet the grading rubric. I can still cover all the topics. It's just in terms of format, what would be most useful is for me to do this kind of product. And like I said, every single professor, every single class for my entire graduate school career, with the exception of one, made that change. I allow students to be mentioned. I tell my students that at the start of the semester, here's what the assignments are. They typically built to the final assignment. So you're doing it in pieces. If this doesn't work for you, let me know what will, right? For the research class that I teach, the final paper is about a 15 to 20-page research paper. I'm like, a research paper is just a few paragraphs away from a grant application. They typically ask you for the same stuff, right? So give us a sense of what the problem is. How did this become a problem? Tell us what the potential solutions are. Tell us how you would implement this, right? Like, that's a grant application. It's also a research proposal, right? So I tell my students, if you're at a field placement and you would rather turn this into like a grant proposal, find a grant. Or let's look at like, what are some of the other components that they would ask for, like staffing, which I'm not going to ask you for in a research paper, but let's add that to this. And you know what, if you turn it in, I'm gonna grade it. So if you give me the staffing section and I'm like, oh, well, you should make these changes, now you've gotten free feedback on a grant application, right? So find ways to make assignments work for you, to prepare you for work, and also to have products that you can show to demonstrate that you can do the work. So your resume is not a theoretical exercise on what you can do. It's a trophy case of what you've already done, right? And you can also use your LinkedIn page in a similar way. And we'll talk about that, I think, coming up. I don't even remember the order of my slides. No, we'll do it in a little bit. Okay. So the key is translating micro work to macro work, particularly when it comes to terminology. Again, there's a lot of stuff that just rolls off the tongue in social work classes, talking to other social workers, that we don't realize when we're talking to people who aren't in social work, make absolutely no sense to them, right? So do the translation work for them in your application materials. In the guidebook that I talked about, I go through about 8 different macro jobs and break down the job description and say, here's what you should do, like in your resume. And if you were to apply for this type of job, right? In terms of like looking at the language that it's using, replace these words in your resume, right? And, again, finding more words that you can use in your job search, right? So, so there's about 8 job descriptions that I break down in the toolkit that can be useful for translating things. excuse me, there's also another section of the guidebook where I actually have a micro practice social worker who is a school social worker take her bullet points that she has on her resume as a school social worker and translate them for macro jobs to which she was applying. So for example, she was applying to a program coordinator doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So this was the job posting. And then here's how she changed her bullet point as a school social worker to match what they were asking for in the job posting. And she does that for about 5 or 6 jobs. So that can be helpful too, if you're looking through the guidebook. And then lastly, consider doing a functional resume instead of a chronological resume if you're looking to move from micro practice work to macro practice work. So a functional resume may be best when you've acquired the knowledge, abilities, skills, and experiences through means other than paid employment, right? When you are transitioning from micro to macro practice, when maybe the best case you have for the job you're applying for is not your most recent job. And so maybe your most recent job is something like retail because you just needed to make some money while you're in school. But before you went to school, you did project coordination or something like that. And a chronological resume, you may be putting like retail clerk ahead of that, right? And then someone's going to spend 7 seconds on this and be like, why does a salesperson at JCPenney think that they can be our policy analyst, right? So sometimes doing a functional resume is more useful than doing a chronological resume, particularly if you have taken on employment just to make ends meet. That wasn't necessarily tied into building your case. When you've been undertitled, which is a big thing, right? Undertitling is second to underpayment in terms of inequity in employment that disproportionately impacts women and racial and ethnic minorities. And so they may call you like team lead, right? But you do all the training for new people, you do all the onboarding, like you're technically a supervisor and in some cases a manager if you actually make hiring and firing decisions and do performance reviews, right? My first job out of college, I think my title was volunteer coordinator. And I recruited and trained the volunteers. I also taught all the parenting classes. I did individual interventions with the women and their children. I did case management for the families. I did speaking engagements to raise money. I wrote grants. I did our website, right? So I was undertitled. And so if I were to look at jobs like senior coordinator or project manager or something like that, it may seem like I was doing a huge jump from volunteer coordinator to like project director. But if you looked at the actual task that I did, then you would see that, yeah, I basically did that just at a smaller scale, right? So that might be another time when doing a functional resume may be more beneficial than a chronological resume, which is heavily tied to what your job title was, where you worked, and how long you worked there. And also if you frequently have changed jobs, then that might work out better. You can also do a hybrid resume, which is a combination of a functional resume and a chronological resume. Another reason to do that you may consider doing a functional resume is how many of you have applied for jobs and they're like, upload your resume here, and then you upload it, right? You make sure it's nice, you upload the PDF, you make sure it's the right one, you're good to go, you click next, and then it's like, enter your work history, right? And you're like, why don't you just read the resume that I just gave you, right? If you feel that way, then you are probably not making the most of your resume. Your resume is your best case for a position. Your work history is a chronological list of your paid legal employment, right? If a chronological ordering of your paid legal employment is your best case, then yes, it's a shame that you have to do that twice. If it's not, then make sure that your resume is actually making the best case. Your resume is for the hiring team. Your work history is for HR, right? And so it's even two different audiences, which means they don't need to be the same document. Again, your resume is not a position description. So you are not telling me what the job told you that you were going to do when you got it, the job you have now or have had before. You're going to put on your resume what you actually did. Sometimes I have students, and this is particularly true of field placement, who, they go into field placement and they're not given much instruction at all about what it is that they're supposed to do there. So they create their own field placement manual for the next student who comes behind them about what to do. They create their own project because they don't want to just go there and not do anything for all those hours, right? And then they're like, well, I don't know if I can put that in my resume. And I'm like, well, what do you think will happen? Like, do you think they're going to call your field placement supervisor and your field placement supervisor is going to be like, no, they didn't do all that. I told them to sit there and do nothing because I wasn't actually there to supervise them. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Put what you actually did. Don't lie. But if you did more than what the job said in the position description, then make sure that that's noted. Your resume is also not an accounting of your workday. Whenever I do resume consultations with people who are switching from micro to macro, the first thing that I tell them to do is to turn their job description, to turn their resume bullet points upside down. And that usually solves like 50% of their problem. So if they've been doing micro work, the first few bullet points are like, met with individual clients, did diagnostic assessments based on the DSM-5, created treatment plans, right? And then the last bullet points are like reviewed policies that affected our clients, designed program materials for a new program that we implemented, right? And the reason why they put them at the bottom is because that's what they spent the least amount of their workday on. Okay. Your resume is not a workday pie. It's not if you spent 60% of your time meeting with clients, that needs to be 60% of your bullet points. It is, what is your best case for this job, right? Typically, when I tell micro people to flip their job descriptions, it solves a lot of the problems. So the first two bullet points are, I developed a program and I kept up with policy. And then at the bottom is like, I met with clients, because that's going to be the least important to that job, to the job that you're applying for now in a macro position, right? So it doesn't have to be like an accounting of how you spent your time. It's just, what did you do there? What knowledge, abilities, and skills did you do there? And what experiences do you have that prove it, right? And that's similar to like an EPAR report, which is a human research thing, which says, what's the percentage effort that you gave to things, right? So again, this is not about percentage effort. This is what is your best case. So your resume is your introduction to an organization. It's your best case for the role. It's your first completed product to a future employer. So that's why the way it looks is important. And then lastly, it's a flex. Go out here and tell these people how great you are. You better get off this social work, I'm humble stuff. No, get out there and flex on these people. Be like, I did all this stuff by myself, or I worked in the team, but we know how teams work. You were dragging that team across the finish line. We know you're the one who got the team to victory, right? So go ahead, flex on your resume and all the stuff that you've done. So lastly, I want to cover ways to use LinkedIn. So I'm not paid by LinkedIn. I just want to make that very clear. This is not a commercial. I just really like them and find it to be useful. So you can use LinkedIn to test your search terms, also find new ones and refine your search terms, right? Remember, that's our first step in our job search anyway. If you're trying to understand what a job is or decide between jobs. So if you're like, okay, so what is the difference between a program coordinator and a program manager? Then you can look at both and compare the job descriptions to see what are the common elements of project coordination versus the common elements of project directing, right? To refine your job parameters. So again, once you get your red lights, yellow lights, and green lights, right? Help you to refine that. Maybe you end up taking some words out because once you find out what a policy analyst does, you realize that would be really boring, right? That just sounded cool because somebody said it one time, but then you look at it and you're like, I don't want to do that, right? So it helps you to refine what you're looking for. And of course, find jobs to actually apply for. You can also use LinkedIn to build your network, to find out what jargon is used in other industries, not just social work. So how do people in higher education talk about this? Or how do people in corporate spaces talk about this, right? You can see what pathways exist to a job, and we'll look at that really quickly, and see how other people built their case. Use LinkedIn to get in front of people. So finding people to do informational interviews with, find events to attend, to start getting acquainted with people, getting your name out there, building connections. And same thing with the groups and companies, just start interacting with people. Again, you have a professional degree in people. People are the resource that you need. And then also to build out your profile. So doing some of the skills and quizzes, getting recommendations from people. LinkedIn allows you to just get a general letter of recommendation. So it doesn't have to be for a specific job. It can just be in general. I was her field instructor and she did all these amazing things. And we talked about some of the courses that they offer. So before I close up with the resources, let's just look at LinkedIn really quickly so I can show you where to find those things. Okay, why are you acting like you don't know me, LinkedIn? Okay, there we go. You got to be kidding me. See, now it's acting up because it knows I'm being recorded. It just likes to show out. Okay. So, is everybody still able to see my screen with the LinkedIn pulled up? Okay. So let's just say we wanted to do project coordinator, okay? So if we put that into the search engine, there are a couple of things that will show up across the top. The first thing to think about with LinkedIn is that it uses a similar AI to Google. And so part of LinkedIn being successful for you will depend on how you're able to feed the AI. That includes what engagement you have on the LinkedIn website, and it also includes your profile. So specifically when we look at jobs, the first thing that you'll notice is it's not just going to find just project coordinator jobs. It's going to search your profile, see what things you have on your profile, and then try to find project coordinator jobs that match that. So if any of you put in project coordinator, you might not get these same jobs because it's going to use what's in your profile, right? The other thing that the AI does is it tells you when your profile matches a job. So when things in your profile match over 60% of what's in this job description, right? So you may have heard that for larger companies, they may use AI to scan resumes. And if you don't have the words from the job description in your resume, then it gets kicked out the system. There are some people who use some unethical ways to beat that. I don't think that's necessary. Just craft your application materials to that particular job. One way that you can do that is, so first, I can start my job application by applying for jobs with my key terms that says it already matches my profile. Basically, they're telling me this is low-hanging fruit, right? So maybe I get some wins, I get these out first, right? The other thing I can do is I can say, okay, so here's a project coordinator job. It's not saying my profile matches. How dare they? I think I'd be an excellent project coordinator for them. Let me click on it. And then I can see like what their job duties are, what words they're using. And then I can go back to my profile and I can see, okay, I'm not using these same terms. So I need to go into my profile and add some of these terms and some of these words. Then I can run this job search again and see if my profile now matches the job, right? And so that's one way that you can sort of do a check yourself before you apply and get kicked out of their analytics. right? So this is an easy way to do that. So we talked about all the ways that you can look for jobs. You're finding new keywords, you're finding what interests you, you're highlighting, you're doing your green, yellow, red, all of that stuff. Okay. The other thing that we can do is we can look at people. So these are people who in their job title have project coordinator, right? And then I can look, we got some MSWs. So one, I can find people to follow. The more connections that you have on LinkedIn, the more it ranks you in the AI. So you'll come up in more searches when recruiters are going in to look for things. If you do the easy apply, it helps to bring you up higher in the analytics, all that stuff. So we want to connect with more people. So let's connect with people who have jobs that we want, right? The other thing that we can look at, so we see that this is an MSW, right? And we can say, hey, like I aspire to have this job. And this person's at University of Michigan. Again, still don't know the geopolitics of that. I don't know if you're happy right now or if you're like, get that Wolverine off the screen. Okay. I'll figure it out later. Okay. But one of the things that you can do is you can say, so what jobs did they have that ultimately got them to a project coordinator position? Not only will this give you some keywords and some ways to write your bullet points about how you've done things from how they describe the jobs that they've had, but it also shows you maybe what are some other titles you can look for on your pathway to becoming a project coordinator, right? You can look and see what other organizations they've been connected to. And then in a moment, we'll look at organizations because again, the way to find 100% of the jobs that an organization offers is by going to their own site. So we can start gathering the names of some of the organizations that are doing work that we're interested in. We can see what types of, skills and stuff that they have, but also in addition to education. So we have education, and they don't have like any other like certifications or stuff. So sometimes students will ask me who are interested in macro practice, well, should I get a license? I don't know. But you can look and see, okay, so are other social workers who have these jobs, did they get licensed, right? So this person has an LCSW, this person is an LSW, this person has a PhD, right? It just kind of seems all over the place. So do you need a license to be a project coordinator? No, you obviously don't need it. Not everybody has one. Does it add any value? Maybe. Some people have it, right? Some people don't. And so you can, again, find people to connect to, interact with their pages, find out what pathways they took to get to their job, find language that you can use in your own bullet points and profile, bullet points for your resume and profile. And then you can look to see like what types of certifications, licensure things do they have, to see if that's something that you might be interested in or might need to get in order to progress in that. Kristen.
I had a quick question before, if you're going to move off LinkedIn.
Sure.
Is it considered, like if you, sometimes you don't want to be like creeping on an ex's Facebook page,
Mhm.
or, that's considered kind of, you don't want to do that, almost impolite, but LinkedIn, is it okay to check out profiles of people that you're interested in?
Yeah, so for two reasons. One, they have to have the paid version to see exactly who checked them out. So like on my page, it will tell me, it'll tell me like 244 people viewed my profile. For the people who I know and whom I'm connected, those are the first ones it'll tell me. But it's like, if you want to know anybody who you don't already know, you got to pay for the premium. So the chances of them knowing that you were on their profile, unless they wouldn't know, unless one, you were already connected, in which case it's not weird at all that people with whom I'm connected looked at my profile. And the people who I don't know, I would have to pay money to find out who they are. So that's one thing. They're unlikely to know. The other thing is that this boosts the rest of my analytics for people to view my profile. So I want people to view my profile. I want to appear in searches. That helps my analytics in the AI system. So
Okay.
no, people will be happy that you checked out their profile.
So the nature, the kind of the rules of engagement for LinkedIn are just different than other social sites. Okay. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Just a few more things about how to use LinkedIn. We're going to go back to our project coordinator. So finding groups. So sometimes it's people who are studying, people who are sharing jobs, just people in the space to whom you may want to connect. Again, leveraging relationship, you have a degree in people, and then interacting with those groups, boost your analytics, right? So liking their post, commenting on their post, those sorts of things. Courses. So again, these are the courses that are offered on LinkedIn. Some are free, some you may need to have a membership to do. Again, you can do the free trial, or you can like pay for a month's subscription and knock a couple of these out, right? And then events, again, just how you can get in front of people. So finding things that are of interest to you or led by organizations to whom you may be about to send a resume to, so that you can attend their event, be really engaging, talk a lot. And then when you send in your resume, they're going to be like, no, why does the name Annie Grier sound familiar, right? But we're going to use psychology against them, right? We're going to become familiar to them. And then their brain is going to create a pathway to, I don't know what it is, but something about me likes this Annie Grier person. Let's move her to the next step, right? So we're going to get in front of people. And then also companies. So finding companies who are doing the work that you want to do, and then seeing what jobs they have to offer. And you can also do a similar thing with the people aspect is if I, go to someone's profile and I can see where they work. Yeah, show me these people. I want to show me these people. All right, let's just go to the companies that this person follows. So I can go to this organization and then I can go to jobs and it will tell me all the jobs that they have. If this is just an organization that I want to work for, right? So, or I can go I can go through either the company's way to find that, or I can go through the people and go to the companies that they work for to then go to the company's website and see what jobs they offer. Okay. So this is why Annie is a fan of LinkedIn, because there's so many ways that you can use it outside of just doing a job search. And then once you find jobs that you like, you've got a good handle on your terms, then you can use those same terms in the other sites, right? So then you can plop those into Indeed and Idealist and Monster and all that other stuff, right? Lastly, in terms of resources, there are 2 slides here of macro-focused organizations that you can connect with if you're interested. So this will be in the PDF version of this presentation. I myself am a commissioner with the Special Commission to Advance Macro Practice and Social Work. I also chair the Macro Workforce Work Group. I would love to have students and young professionals on board who are willing to do some work and get some stuff on their resume. So this could be mutually beneficial, huh? You join my group, you also get some products and stuff. Oh, that was the other thing in terms of LinkedIn. On your profile, and you're going to make it all snazzy and beautiful, but one of the features that I really like is they have a featured section. And not only can you upload your resume, but this is where you can upload group projects that you've done in school. If you join a board of directors and you do stuff for them, you can put those products on there, right? So that you have an actual archive of your completed work and a demonstration that you've done those things. If any of your courses, and I don't know if Wayne State's courses are in Canvas, Canvas also has this type of function, but I think it closes after 3 years after graduation, whereas your LinkedIn profile you'll have for forever. The other thing that you can do is if you put a bunch of your products and stuff on here, and it's unlimited, the number that you can add. So you can add articles, you can, just speaking engagement certificates, all the things, right? Then what you can do is you can go into your resume and you can hyperlink back to it. So like I hyperlink to my full CV. So if they clicked on that, it'll bring them to the CV that I have on my LinkedIn page. If I'm talking about podcasts that I've done, this will take them to the link to the podcast, right? So I have a sample of works that I've done and it's all hyperlinked. So it'll take them directly to those. So that I'm using a small amount of space on my resume to say that I've like authored some stuff, right? But if they want to see the full thing, then they can go there and they can check out the quality of my work, right? So that's another way that you can use your LinkedIn profile, is to keep an archive of your completed products that help build your case, right? And the last thing was just in addition to the regular guidebook, there's the workbook version, which just has the assessment and the game plan. Both are free for download from my website. The link's been dropped a couple of times in the chat, so it's always available. If I ever update it, it will still be available there. So that's me, and that's the presentation. What questions do you have?
Questions, but this was very informative. Thank you so much.
Good. Was
Mhm.
it what you thought it was going to be when you saw this was advertised and you were like, I should make my way here? Is this what you were
Yeah,
hoping to get out of it?
it was definitely more. I like, my interest do lay in micro social work, but I'm also interested in the macro perspective, and
Mhm.
I thought that you showed just such a wonderful way that they can be blended together, and that it's just like it's not so limiting, regardless of kind of like what your interests are or what path you want to take.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. What about other people? Is this what you were hoping for from this 2 hours? Are you leaving disappointed and going to email Andre and say, don't ever invite her back? What are you doing?
I think I'll speak for the group when I say nobody feels that way. We got a lot of positive messages in the chat. I got some messages, some personal messages. And so before we break, do folks have any questions? Again, the workbook is in the chat. A lot of the exercises that Ms. Grier outlined were very helpful, just for your general career. And I think that, there's a lot of conversation to be had in terms of using what's been made available today. Also, again, this video recording will be available. So, and I know we're probably going to explore the best ways to use this. This is a high caliber presentation. So do we have any other questions?
All right. I'm seeing someone else say that it was informative. Awesome. I just want to make sure you're getting what you need.
Give us your positive feedback in the chat, and then let's go ahead and give Mr. an audible or inaudible round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I love doing these presentations. So I really appreciate you reaching out and inviting me.
Well, we want to thank Miss Amy Elwert for bringing us this opportunity. Thanks, Amy. No, it was really great having you, man.
I'm glad it worked out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think it worked out for it was a great session. So
feel free to reach out anytime. Again, I will send the PDF version of this PowerPoint to Andre for him to distribute to whoever attended or whoever wants it. You can feel free to email me. I do individual consultations with people just to talk through career searches and resume stuff. I don't charge. I just do it on weekends. So that's the thing, is like, since you're not paying me for it, you have to work around my schedule. But yeah, I love getting together and talk through things individually or in small groups. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions from here on out.
Much.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great
So much,
evening.
folks. Everybody have a
too.
great
Bye.
night. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.